All right, so good morning. I'm going to go ahead and note just some of the basics, some of the housekeeping, and then we will launch into Leah's more official introduction. So again, good morning. I am Sarah Murdoch with the Leadership Group Foundation. I would really like to welcome everyone to our Future of Work panel. In case you can't see your screen at the moment and are just listening in, that is indeed where you are. Future of Work. So as with all the sessions today, please feel free to post comments in the chat box. We will indeed be making those accessible to others, as well as questions for our panelists in the Q&A box that will be referenced this morning. So as you probably noted from your program there, this session, Future of Work, will run until 9:45 a.m. Pacific time. We will then have a 15-minute break to excuse your Zoom gloom before our second block begins at 10 a.m. So please note, in case you don't have it in front of you, that all of your session links are in the digital program, which is in your email, and our chat moderators will drop them in the chat box as well. So without further ado, on to the good part. I am so privileged and grateful to invite to the floor Leah Toeniskoetter, West Region Lead of Corporate Citizenship for Deloitte. Leah, the show is yours.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Leah Toeniskoetter, and I am the West Region Lead of Corporate Citizenship. We are very proud to be a sponsor of today's Education Summit, and I thank SVLG staff and the panel participants for their time and effort in hosting a virtual event. Deloitte is the largest global professional services firm with over 270,000 employees worldwide, 70,000 here in the US. Our diverse set of services has really enabled us to support business, government, higher education, and nonprofits as we navigate through this tumultuous time. Our experts in eminence have published a series of articles, reports, and periodicals about the impacts of COVID across industries and sectors. One report that aligns with today's panel discussion is our publication of Global Human Capital Trends. Respondents to this survey revealed that organizations are really struggling to navigate the fast-changing skills landscape. 53% of respondents said that between half and all of their workforce will need to change their skills and capabilities in the next 3 years. At the same time, only 17% of respondents believe that their organization could anticipate the skills needed by their workforce in those same 3 years. While the term reskilling is often used as a path forward, one takeaway from these responses is the need for a holistic worker development approach, one that considers both the dynamic nature of jobs and the equally dynamic potential of people to reinvent themselves. If companies can't foresee the skills needed in 3 years, a focus on building workers' resilience for both the short and the long term, no matter the landscape, would be of great value. This moment offers a chance to shift our perspective on workforces, and workplaces. Perspective that will be even more important as we push forward in the workforce recovery. With that, I'll hand it over to Sarah to introduce our panelists who are going to speak to this dynamic moment and the opportunities they see for the future of work. Thanks, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leah. And in the spirit of keeping our conversation today running smoothly, we are working with George Chao, our moderator, to go ahead and let the panelists kind of speak for themselves, since only they can do their work justice. But I would love to go ahead and bring George Chao to the floor. He joins us today as a board member from Work to Future. And this panel was his brilliant idea, and we could not be happier for that. Thank you so much. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. Just want to maybe give an agenda for today. So we will each introduce ourselves for 5 minutes, and after that, we will have about 30 minutes of conversation, and then the last 10 minutes will be Q&A. So I think we have a great panel here. We have people from both public policies, Brookings Institute, and also SBR, from community college and also from manufacturing and also my online university. So I will start introducing myself. So I'm with Manix Consulting. We are funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce, NIST, helping local manufacturing companies on workforce development, and also is a board member for Work the Future, like many of our other panelists. And next, I would like to have Vinz Koller. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Vinz Koller, Social Policy Research Associates. We are a small research evaluation technical assistance firm doing workforce development studies throughout the country and we're located in Oakland and all over the West Coast really these days, working from our home. So I'm very glad to be here.
And Annelies, maybe next, introduce yourself.
Hi, and thank you, George, for inviting me on this panel. My name's Annelies Goger, and I'm a Rubenstein Fellow at the Brookings Institution. I focus mainly on talent development, inclusive economic development, and safety net programs. And most recently, I worked with Vinz and with George and some others on a project to interview employers in the Bay Area around their changing talent needs.
Thank you. Jeff?
Good morning. My name is Jeff Pallin, and after a successful career in corporate, in which I rose to the top of the Western Hemisphere operations of a Japanese electronics firm, and then served on the board of directors in Japan, I started a small consultancy practice. Why does that sound familiar? And this led me to teaching graduate courses in business and management in several Bay Area universities. I then transitioned into full-time employment in education, first as an academic director at UC Berkeley, then as Dean of Workforce and Economic Development at the San Jose Evergreen Community College District, and now as an academic division dean at Mission College in Santa Clara. This portfolio, Business Technology and Kinesiology, is primarily CTE, or Career Technical Education, and I am involved on campus and in the region, working with faculty, government agencies, funding sources, employers, and employer intermediaries, like the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, in developing and running programs of study resulting in certificates, degrees, and transfer for our students. The topic today, the future of work, is not static, and as we all recognize, continues to transform, change, and challenge all of us. I look forward today to contributing to a collective understanding of where we go from here, pandemic notwithstanding, to create better lives for our citizens through education and employment.
Thank you, Jeff. Alan, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name's Alan Takahashi. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Cobham San Jose. We're located in South San Jose. We have about 550 employees. We design and manufacture RF microwave electronics, primarily for the aerospace and defense industry. I'm also on the Planning Commission for the City of Cupertino and the Board of Directors for Work to Future. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Last but not least, we have Ruth from University of Phoenix.
Good morning. Morning, George. Good morning, everybody. Yes, my name's Ruth Veloria. I'm the Chief Strategy and Customer Officer at the University of Phoenix. Some of you may know we have over 80,000 students and a very diverse set, mostly in their 30s, working adults, 67% female, 34% African American, and 18% Hispanic. So we represent, the gender and race diversity. And we're very excited to talk today about the ways that we think about problems to solve on behalf of students and their career progression, which is a big focus for me in our strategy office.
Thank you, Ruth. So maybe I will start with all of us, the conversation. So maybe I'll start with Vinz. Vinz, maybe, Work to Future has been working with SPR, putting out this report on future of works. Maybe you can share with us some, what's findings from this report. Maybe you can share with our audience. Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. In fact, it might be good to show the slides. I brought a couple of slides just to show some graphics. So my colleagues at SPR and I were asked by the team at Work to Futures to look at the effects of automation and artificial intelligence and the future of work on job seekers, educators in the Valley. We started in January. By March, COVID hit, and it really turned the world upside down and made any of those neat predictions we were writing about pretty much not worth the paper they were written on. or the computer screens. But of course, the questions about automation and AI were still relevant, and perhaps more so. Who would be most severely affected by COVID? Would COVID speed up automation effects? And if so, would those effects hit certain groups of workers more than others? And finally, what would it all mean for skills that are in demand and might be in demand in the future? So I'll give you a couple of snapshots that tell a preliminary story. You're familiar with the phrase that while talent is spread evenly, opportunity is not. Well, it turns out neither is the risk as represented by COVID. That's no surprise. I'll show you what I mean in 3 or 4 graphs. For a real-time look at job declines, we took a look at the job postings themselves. So this chart shows median earnings of certain occupations from left to right, decline in number of postings in the y-axis, with 0 decline being the line at the top of the graph. So all of those jobs are in negative territory, and the size of the bubbles represent the number of postings. It turns out, again, somewhat predictably perhaps, that the largest decline in job postings, this chart compares a 1-month period in February to March to the month of May. The largest decline occurred in lower paid occupation groups like food prep, building and grounds maintenance, and such, with median earnings around 30 to 45,000. The decline during that period was about 40% or more, while computer techs, management occupations declined by less than half of that. And if we go to the next slide, we also wanted to see how it affected different levels of education. And here the differences are also pretty stark. Job postings for PhDs were unaffected, shown here on the right of the graph at the null point. So you have to see that's 0 to the left is decline into the negative territory. Those for positions that require a bachelor or a master's degree declined by around 18%, again, in that same period. And those with less education, so again, these are postings requiring less education, declined by around 28%. Let's take one more, a couple of graphs to show you how the effect of COVID, the COVID vulnerability affects workers. So the next graph, if you shows that to make matters worse, perhaps, there's also a disconcerting co-occurrence of the risk of being exposed to the virus and holding a job that is vulnerable of being eliminated or automated because of COVID. To map the vulnerability, which is shown here on the x-axis, we used the definition developed by the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. They sort of map jobs according to how vulnerable are they to being eliminated or automated because of COVID. The y-axis, you see the exposure risk. And to map that, you can see obviously there's a correlation here, if you, or at least a co-occurrence. If you go to the next slide, to express it in geographic terms, you can see here the zip codes with the highest incidence of COVID on the left and the highest percentage of individuals in vulnerable occupations on the right. And you see clearly there's significant overlap here. What we also found is that digitization, virtualization, and automation trends were massively accelerated by COVID in some areas. For example, healthcare providers were reporting that telemedicine plans that they were going to roll out over 2 to 5 years were actually being put in place in 2 to 3 months this spring and summer. So in many ways, the future of work is now, as it manifests itself in unexpected ways, and that is part of it. Some emergency remote working plans in sectors where this can be done easily may become permanent. And there's a sort of a great sort occurring into jobs that can be done from home, others requiring specialized equipment in manufacturing, perhaps, that cannot. So we'll hear more about that from other panelists. There is a silver lining, I would say, in all of this when it comes to talent development. Talent is still in demand, talent is available. And as education is also being done virtually, virtually, the idea of cohorts has changed. Businesses, in collaboration with educators, are building virtual cohorts that are bringing down some of those challenges. So I'll stop here now. There's much more to talk about, but we've got people with other perspectives that are really valuable to this. So that's a little bit of an insight into that study.
Great, thank you, Vince. So, Annelies, I want to maybe ask you, I do know that Brookings Institute has done many studies on future works. And also you have also interviewed 30 plus companies here in the Valley. Maybe you can share with a little bit about, what's your findings or what did you see and some of those ideas and notes. Thank you.
Sure. So to preface it, we did do the interviews before COVID hit, or actually right as COVID was hitting, because actually we had to do some of them virtually for that reason. But I think that's important in some ways because it gives us a sense of long-term, what is the long-term pipeline need for employers in terms of labor and talent, instead of focusing too much on short-term effects that could be, caused by any number of factors related to the virus. So one of the key takeaways that we had from our research was that employers, when we walked in talking about automation and new technologies like AI, they raised other kinds of technologies that they were deploying in a much wider range. So it wasn't just about automation and AI, but it was also things like biotech. And it was also something that they talked about. So the second piece is that they talked about it. They don't necessarily need the person from MIT who knows how to develop AI from scratch. It's not necessarily about the people that have the competencies to create the technology, but they need actually a combination of skills that involves people who know the industry well enough to know how to apply the AI, but know how to use the technology enough. So they know enough about it from the academic data science point of view, analytical skills, critical thinking skills, but they also know the industry really well. So a good example might be one of the employers was in food production, and they wanted to see, talent they need talent that they couldn't find where they could actually apply the AI to understand, and interpret the new forms of biology that they're developing for new products, to be able to measure and monitor those things in real time. So that requires a real good understanding of their industry and the science part. So I think the way that many countries do that is they have their academic pathways, but they also have what are called blended learning pathways, where you spend part of your training on the job and part of your training in the classroom. So that's something that I think we could talk about more as a group. And then the final thing I would say is that we noticed that sometimes employers had job postings that would require things like, we require a year of experience in medical device assembly. What if the person has a year of experience in some other form of assembly that involves electronics? Like, isn't that good enough? So I think a lot of employers in how they post the job sometimes might be weeding out candidates that really have transferable skills. And I think employers can really look at, well, is this a preference or is it a requirement? And really thinking through that as far as who you might be eliminating by putting something forward as a very specific requirement.
Thank you. Next, Jeff, just want to maybe ask you, what is the community college's role to help, on equality, diversity, and access to help build this future of work talent pipeline?
Sure. Let me start with just a simple historical observation, and this is from ancient times to the present. Various societies that rise to a position of wealth and dominance often start to splinter apart as soon as wealth and power become concentrated in the hands of the few, and opportunity and privilege are accorded to only those who actually already come from privilege and wealth. So the cry for social justice that we're hearing right now, Black Lives Matter, really comes from deep within a society that is a long way to go to promote social justice and equity. And here in Silicon Valley, we're witness to the very forces of this lack of diversity in the workplace. So there's a study of national employment in high tech disaggregated by ethnicity. Some very simple statistics: 60% employed are non-Latinx white, 26% are Asian, only 7% are Latinx, and barely 5% are Black. So if we compare that with the general population, we see that there's a gap. And that's what I'd like to talk about in terms of the community college. The coming together of the public sector, city, county, state, federal agencies, the private sector, employers, industry sector organizations, intermediaries, community-based organizations, and educational vocational organizations have the most sustainable social impact over the longest period of time if they can work together supporting each other. So the list of potential partners is breathtaking, yet the results, however we measure and define success, fall short. So the good news is we keep trying, and let me just say here and now, the community colleges have a public mandate enshrined in Title V Education Code, supported by the state legislature, the state chancellor's office, our elected officials who serve as our trustees, our faculty, staff, and administrators. We hold the equity promise as real and achievable. We believe that education is the key to a more just and equitable society, and every attendee today who represents the promise of education knows that the actual dimensions of the future of work are evolving and changing, and we rely on our partners in the private and public sectors to guide us. Our career technical education programs require advisory board meetings annually held. We solicit and incorporate input from organizations, and we need entry and middle-level employment candidates in terms of specific job skills. We need to know what you need, what the employers need. These advisory board meetings are mission critical for our ability in the community college to fulfill the public mandate I just mentioned. And that's how we at the community colleges address this ever-evolving workplace need for workers and employers. Our faculty and staff revise curriculum, introduce new programs like our upcoming mechatronics certificate program, jointly developed by engineering, math, computer science, and graphic design faculty. These same faculty hold an annual hackathon for students. And most important of all, we have real-world projects in a team environment in the hackathon. We invite managers to speak as guest lecturers. We hold job events and career fairs. We run site visits, internships, apprenticeships, work-based learning for college credit, and we work together with the UCs, the CSUs, and other private and public four-year institutions, as well as the K-12, to align our programs with student success. So we've got special funding for significantly underserved community members. We braid various grants together to support our students in need, and we find that we actually succeed. So one thing will stay constant about the future of work: few arrive ready to work, and most need time and some form of help. Educational institutions like the community colleges in California are here for precisely that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, Alan, so maybe you can share, as Cobham is 500 and more people here in San Jose, a manufacturing company. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about what kind of workforce skills, in this kind of like future of works, company like Cobham is looking for.
Sure. Yeah, we are we're growing. So there's a demand for workforce expansion just by way of that growth. But also what we've seen is a significant reduction, if you will, in just the electronic technician skill set across the board. Those trade schools are gone. And so traditional recruiting really is tapped out. It's not working for us anymore. And so, we've done a lot to expand on community outreach at the community colleges. We work really closely with EVC, for example, to develop a whole new program called Advanced Manufacturing Technology, with outlets into electronics and other higher tech companies to enable manufacturing jobs that are benefited and pay pretty well, and really are a critical element for the region to kind of fill that middle gap of wages. Because I think what a lot of people acknowledge is the bifurcation of the workforce into haves and have-nots. There are just, by way of how the Valley has been working, manufacturing has been leaving the Valley because of the cost of living. But there are some companies that really need to stay here. And, we're one of those companies. We because we're primarily aerospace and defense, we cannot offshore our manufacturing. And so we really need to make sure we develop that skill set here. And doing it back at more of a grassroots, I think is going to be our best way to achieve that. And working with education is a very important element of that. So in terms of skill sets, right, it's basic math and algebra knowledge, and then we will train for the specific electronics knowledge and develop that curriculum. We've also even have some of our engineers as instructors. And so it'll be an interesting journey for us, and we're going to be in it for the long haul. So I think it's been a interesting aspect so far.
Thank you. Ruth, maybe you can kind of share with us how University of Phoenix is going to help on the workforce pipeline. I heard online learning is very hard these days.
Yes, absolutely.
Also, you guys have partnered with companies like Infosys to help train the future of work. So maybe you can share with them more on that.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff really made some great points there about, the things that work in education for people, especially looking for on-ramps into new careers. He talked about apprenticeships, internships, real world assessments as part of his program. And at the University of Phoenix, the program I wanted to maybe just illustrate today, kind of maybe make it very pragmatic about what successful models might look like for the future and getting people ready for the future of work, is this partnership that we just announced, which is an apprenticeship track. And it is in partnership with Infosys, who are looking for candidates to help them do a lot of the technology-oriented jobs that they're staffing, and with WazU, which is providing a lot of the technology-oriented skills. And so what this program does is it takes somebody who may have completed already an associate's degree, maybe in their community college or or online as well. Plenty of online options for community colleges these days too. And so we put those, high performing graduates from these STEM programs in the community college, and we put them in a full-time position, and they essentially can continue their progress towards their bachelor's degree, which, going back to the information Vinz showed at the beginning of the session, getting to that next level of education may provide people a little bit more of a secure future. While of course bachelor's degrees are not required for all positions, there is some level that you saw of protection there against some of the impact in the COVID scenarios on those bachelor's degree holders is less pronounced than for some of the high school and associates students. So we make sure that we sort of map the learning and the objectives that we have in the program so that they can articulate what they're learning in that work with WazU, which is more of a technically oriented program, and start on a pathway to getting credit, which is going to help them towards their bachelor's degree. So they've got the job training from WazU, they're in an apprenticeship program where they have a job, and they're also now, once they're started and their associate's degree is behind them, the skills training is behind them, they have credits towards the bachelor's degree, and then the employer continues to help subsidize the cost of their education, because obviously cost is a major barrier today for people going on to pursue higher education. So essentially, as full-time junior associates at Infosys, these folks are continuing on for another 12 months, completing the competencies and the credits required to go on and earn a bachelor's degree. So it's a faster path to bachelor's degree. They're earning while they're learning. These are all, I think, elements of successful models for the future of work that help us get people involved and learning in a way with direct relevancy to what they're ultimately going to do and contribute in their careers.
Thank you, Ruth. So I heard we only have 5 minutes before our Q&A time. So maybe each one of you, I know you guys have a lot to share. So maybe each one of you have 1 minute to share about, like, what do you think about the roles of the private sectors or community college or education institute or any of those can help on this future works, areas. So maybe I'll start with Vince. Maybe give us your thoughts on
how to get it all fixed in 1 minute.
Yeah.
No problem. I think, the things that we've been talking about before COVID hit are, of course, still true. And in some ways, they're more so true. We've got to get, and I thought Ruth's point about how to restructure pathways in ways that are very responsive to business. We've always talked about the fact that for business, sometimes it's tough to get talent development in a form that serves their needs. But business, as co-creator of that talent, has this potential of really making sure that when folks are trained, they're exactly trained to the specs that they need. And educators in partnership with business can then ensure that the educational requirements and the portability of what is being learned is still guaranteed. So people are not necessarily then stuck. And so I think that's still true. We have to rethink and we have to come back from this in a better way than we went into it. And I think that opportunity exists. So I guess the meta message is, let's not let this crisis go wasted or unused for rebuilding of a educational pathways and really a systemic approach that will be better when we come back.
Thank you. How about Annelies? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think Vince is correct that shifting from a mindset of consuming talent to co-producing talent and employers being more highly engaged is a critical part. And I think to get there, we need to see learning in the workplace less as a cost and more as an investment. And so that requires having a longer term horizon. And so I think there's some structural challenges within how American business is structured, where hiring practices tend to see someone who needs some learning on the job as a more of a risk than as an investment. So I think there's a piece there to unpack. And then the second thing is, I think, Alan was talking about all the work he's doing to try to create that pipeline for his company. We should build the systems so that not every employer has to put that much effort in to create their own customized thing, but it's a system an employer can participate in, and where there's like some shared infrastructure there as a system. So that, because if you ask every employer to invest that much time and energy and to create their own program, it just isn't going to be feasible, especially for small and mid-sized companies. And what we saw in another study that I did actually when I was at SPR is that when the state invests in reimbursing employers for training, the highest impacts are for the companies that are between 18 employees and 100. So those over 100, it was kind of a wash. Those under 18, they actually lost revenue and had lower size after the training intervention. But those in the middle that were assuming they're growing faster, they're companies that could really benefit from training but may not have formal structures for training. I think we need to do more around that space to incentivize employers to train, especially when they're in that mid-level range.
Thank you. Jeff, what's your thought on how does community college role to help on this area?
I would say that the community college doesn't necessarily have a monopoly. But one thing that I would pick up that Alan was talking about, and Annelies also mentioned, about how do we do this? Certainly, Cobham Electronics, where Alan Takahashi works, has a very specific need. And I think it's important that we, as a collective group, look at what's succeeding in that specific need and then apply it to the next specific need. Instead of trying to boil the ocean, which is wonderful, isn't it? It gives you a great feeling. But instead of trying to boil the ocean and solve all of the problems at once, maybe the partnership needs to move very, very intentionally, one step at a time, find out what works here, apply it to another specific industry sector or program, employer, however you want to define it, and continue to build on that. The community colleges in the 4 years and the K-12s have a tremendous breadth of programs around career technical education. And it's not about, hey, Mission College does it better than you, my dog's better than yours. kind of a thing. It's about figuring out where will it work and how can we generate success, mark that success, learn from it, and continue to build on it.
Thank you, Jeff. Alan, maybe you can kind of share with us company like Cobham, what's your role to help in this area?
Sure. So I definitely feel like, you know, there's a tremendous opportunity to reshape, if you will, the landscape with regard to how companies can become more involved in the community for the benefit of both, obviously, right? From the standpoint of the connection that helps with the workforce, but also from a giving back to the community. And we're just, the issues facing the Bay Area are challenging, right? From the standpoint of cost of living, transportation, all these, right? There's just so many things. And I think a solution that involves education and industry and the regional governments working together to come up with solutions is an important element of success, and that's where we're at now. And I think it's an exciting time, and the problems we know are right in front of us. So I think the only way we're going to work to solve them is collectively.
Thank you. Ruth, how about you share your 1 minute thought on this as well? Our University of Phoenix can.
Well, you know, I think a lot of good points have come up about the idea about frameworks and repeatable models, and what Jeff said about you got to start with one example and build from it. I mean, that's the way work gets done. You have to make a pattern and model that works. You know, this apprenticeship program that we're doing is really the first time we've done anything this structured. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot, and then other employers will see it, come to the table, and we'll be, you know, excited to partner with them to make it happen. So it's authentic assessment in the classes. It's real world experience, and it's co-creating pathways with employers that are the things we need for the future of work.
Thank you. We have a lot of Q&As coming up, so we are in the Q&A section now. And then, so one question maybe, you know, any one of you can answer is, what are your thoughts on further effectively approaching bridging, building, and implementing internships based on partnerships among colleges, universities, and organizational employers, including particularly for underdeserved and diverse student populations? One of you can just jump on this and answer that. About Vinz, maybe you can share on that.
Well, I will tell you, actually, there's another question further down from April about that also relates to, you know, what do we do before we get to community college level? And I certainly am a fervent believer that these educational pathways could really and should start earlier. They should start in high school. And we have lots of good models, both abroad and in the US, that are being developed to make sure that we find ways to have that exposure to the workplace, and then not just exposure and sort of internship level exposure, but really a more intentional learning pathway start at high school and then continue into college. I think we could fill another session on that alone. There's enormous potential. It makes economies more resilient when that happens, for a number of reasons, and it also reduces the number of opportunity youth and you know, youth that are disconnected from education and from the workplace. And we have to be aware that population has been shrinking, so there have been fewer and fewer disconnected youth over the last few years, and we are expecting right now that is in a massive increase mode, and that we will have many more disconnected youth over the next couple of years. So we cannot afford to lose that generation. And I think we have to accelerate the process of bringing work-based learning into high schools. And high schools are willing partners. They actually want to do this for the most part. Obviously, they're struggling with other issues. But again, that's an opportunity to come out of this crisis better than we went in.
Okay. And then we have Ed was asking about, since most companies are in the business of education, and that's not one of their core competencies, what is a practical approach to this educational needs?
So maybe I'll take that one, George.
Okay.
You know, I think it's a good point. There's a question earlier in the chat about what's going to be the role of the college when all is said and done. You know, that's a huge topic, which could definitely take a whole other session. But, you know, colleges today are assessing and sort of signifying learning. And so partnerships where, you know, a company will speak to a group about, well, how do I create a pathway for my particular firm where you can deliver a piece of that program, we, the firm, can deliver a piece of that program. And so, you know, you need to essentially have on staff at a college and a university these days folks who can do that level of consultative collaboration with businesses. It starts, yes, with advisory board on the program, but it has to go much deeper than that into, you know, what are the skills that you need? And nowadays, you know, with the coming of AI and things to analyze the skills that the employees already have today, you know, if we can, further to Lisa's question about, you know, do people even know the skills of the future? If we could predict the skills of the future, and certainly people do work hard on doing that, you can see the gap between A and B, and then you can start to, you know, work out, well, how do I put modules of learning together that will help me bridge the distance between the point that I'm at now and that future point. And so people, you know, honestly, I sit here as a university saying I believe people will take many different pathways in the future. Degrees will probably be a lower percentage of those pathways once we properly learn how to signal skills and competencies in other ways besides degrees.
And I'd like to add a little bit to that. I think what we found in our study with the Employment Training Panel of the state of California is that those companies that invested in training through that program saw revenue growth and size growth. So it created jobs and it created revenue. So there's a payback for investing. So even though education is not necessarily a business's core competency, I think ongoing learning within the firm is really critical for both for workers and for the employer to stay innovative. And I think the way that blended learning works is that the learning that happens on the job is a lot more experiential and applied, whereas the learning that happens alongside it in the classroom is much more theoretical. So it gives you more of a broad foundation. So you might learn the general concepts, like an electrician in a trade program might learn the general concepts of electricity and how it all works, but then on the job they learn to actually install something through the applied and experiential learning, if that helps create the distinction.
Okay, great. And I saw Peter was asking regarding building a system to enable employers and education institutional to co-create pathways. It seems to me we need to move away from one-on-one relationship between schools and employers. And then but we'll only get going when someone takes up essential roles of coordinating the multiple partners who need to be engaged with that. I think that's where Work the Future is doing, you know, kind of get all the employers and also different employers and different education institute, like the community colleges, you know, state universities, and also online universities, all that together. I think definitely Work the Future, many of the county workforce investment board is doing that. And then maybe each one of you can, we need to wrap up now. Maybe each one of you can give your final thought, you know, each person for 1 minute. We'll start with Vinz.
I think, well, I'm really glad to see the questions here coming across in terms of pathway development and again, building in both directions. I do think one of the points that Peter made regarding the system approach, I think is critical. We cannot do this one-to-one. We can't do it company by company. We really have to get to systems. And that's harder in some ways. But we probably can also do it in both directions. We can work from the bottom up. We also have to work in Sacramento, making sure that these systems articulate well, that the formula funding is there, that we don't have to chase grant dollar after grant dollar and keep having to, in some ways, recreate it over and over. So that would be my sort of final point about, you know, getting to a system approach.
Okay, thank you. And since we're out of time, maybe Annelies, you can give the final thoughts of everybody.
Did you say Alan or Annelies? Sorry, I couldn't.
Annelies, yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I got cut off. Yeah, I think another way we can take this from boiling the ocean to more specific things is to identify high priority gaps like cybersecurity. We know there's a long-term pipeline problem in cybersecurity. So who do we need to get together to build a clear progression from K-12, CTE, community college, regional public universities, all the way through, so that those progressions are clear to the student, but also really well articulated with different providers that offer something at each level. So I think that could help. And I think doing human-centered design and making sure you're getting input from students and parents and input from employers as you go is really critical for making sure that whatever you're building is meeting people's needs and has added value for them.
Thank you everybody for joining us. I'll send it back to Sarah. Sarah, you want to close us or?
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the entire panel. That was riveting, and I'm sure we could go for another couple of hours, but sadly that's not an option today. I also, of course, want to thank George Chao, our fearless moderator here, and to ensure everybody that we'll do our best to secure some of those materials in the follow-up for the summit when we send that out next week. So just the final housekeeping is to please go ahead and follow the links that Kelly was kind enough to drop in the chat box a bit ago, so that you can select which of the panels you'll join us for at 10 a.m. PST. Thank you again to our wonderful panelists. We can't wait to see you again in an afternoon session. Thank you all.